for some reason. Hi, everyone. I can't wait for this conversation. Little does Allison know that I'm going to grill her. No, I'm not.
Oh,
I'm not going to grill you. You can handle it anyway. I can't wait. Okay, so everyone, we're live on Instagram now. We're live everybody everywhere else. Allison, welcome here. I am like a ridiculous fangirl of the Moral Courage Project. And I guess I'm fangirls of the people that I bring on, but please introduce yourself and toot the horn of the Moral Courage Project, please. Toot,
okay.
toot away.
I will. Well, I have to tell you that introductions, I've never liked them much because what do you choose to tell somebody? And at Moral Courage, Earshad wrote a book. That's the founder of Moral Courage called Don't Label Me. So we always joke about, what do we share about each other? And so I'll just introduce myself this way. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. I am a learner, yes, and then a teacher in that order. And that brings me to what I do with Moral Courage. So I teach, I'm the lead instructor for Moral Courage, and we teach communication skills. But it's so much more than that. It's also a mindset that we call confident humility. So, how to use the skills to really learn about each other, to try to understand where other people are coming from, because the world needs that. Have you noticed? It's kind of crazy out there. But Moral Courage. So I met Earshad. Do you want to know how I met Earshad, or do you want to know?
I do. I want to
Do you
know. I
want
want
to
to
know the story?
know.
Okay.
I want to know the real juice.
Okay. So the real juice is I most of my work history has been managing teams, but there was a time where I went back to school. I went back to school later in life, so I'm kind of like the non-traditional learner. And upon graduating, I was looking for some work, and this just coincided with COVID. And I remember sitting, and I was also doing some volunteer work with a board in Utah where I live. And COVID was a very stressful time because everything shut down. And then we had this really dramatic event happen with the killing of George Floyd. And we sat in as a group on that board to kind of discuss and debrief what we were feeling and what we were going through. And that meeting really stood out in my mind because I started to hear my peers talk about how they no longer could have conversations with family members, that they were actually cutting them out of their lives. And Traci, I know you being a therapist, when you start to cut off relationships, that's very concerning. And this was over politics most often. And I said, well, shouldn't we try to understand each other, where we're coming from? And my peers said, no, maybe you're a better person than me, but no, I'm not doing it. I thought, this isn't really the point about being a better person. This is about creating healthy communities. So I went looking for a program that would teach us how to have these difficult conversations. And I came to Earshad's online course called Diversity Without Division. And I took that course, and I thought, this is exactly what I want to bring to this board. And I posted about it on LinkedIn, and Earshad reached out. And what I love about her is we teach relational leadership, and she walks the talk. So we started those conversations, and the timing was great. She was starting the Moral Courage Project and brought me on as the director of education. So that's how I met Earshad and what we do at Moral Courage.
Well, I fangirled both of you on LinkedIn as well. So we have this LinkedIn connection. And I think after this particular, the war in the Middle East in particular, because there's so many going on, was getting a lot of press. There was something about the way that she was speaking about it that I felt was peace building.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like the way that she was talking about it, I'm like, ooh, this is a peace builder. This is somebody that could facilitate really difficult conversations. And every time I would see one of her posts, everything in my nervous system would calm down.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, I'm really drawn to follow Ërshad. And then, of course, then I go seek her out. And I'm like, oh, God, like Oprah loves Ërshad. She's been on Bill Maher. She taught at NYU for 15 years in the public service department. I mean, she's an expert in moral courage. And I also, I guess I was moved by the fact that she and I have I came from a fundamentalist religious background. And I think she did too, and has become more of she's a well, I don't know if she was a fundamentalist Muslim or if she was always a reform Muslim. I don't know. I don't want to make that up.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for her, but she's definitely Muslim, and she cares deeply about her faith. But she did see the need for reform in certain areas, and so when she spoke out, I know there was quite a backlash about it.
Yeah. And I don't know, do you come from a faith background?
I sure do. Yeah, I grew up here in Utah. Grew up Mormon. I left the church in the '90s. But it's interesting. I still would say I'm culturally Mormon. It's like that's where I feel most comfortable because I know like the rituals and the language and everything. But yeah, I did. And to tell me what the question behind that is.
Okay, I'll actually speak to it. It's from a PDF on Moral Courage Project that as religion has declined in our society, that our politics has become our new religion.
Yes.
And so I'm fascinated by this notion. I think there's something that we really miss out on by not having a gathering point. In many ways, I'd hope Sidewalk Talk could be a gathering point.
Right.
When chapters formed, they gather regularly and it becomes another reason to gather in community. But I loved this point that we have created political sects rather than religious sects.
Right.
And that we're playing out this sectarianism in our political milieu instead of our religious one now. And I just was like, this is pretty interesting.
I'm so glad you've taken the conversation here. So thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, this is something that we talk about in our teaching at Moral Courage, that since really about the time when I was leaving my religion, I used to think, this is a decision I'm making, but it seems that there was quite a movement to move away from religion in the '90s. And you just see Pew Research has done some studies on this, and you can see the line where people are just not claiming membership in any church. And, religion has its faults for sure, but it has a lot of benefits where it provides a place to gather. It provides wisdom practice. How do we live well together when sometimes we're so frustrated with each other? How do we forgive each other? And without that sense of community, I think we as humans are looking for a place to find meaning. And in this world where, we have so much access to social media and news that's all decontextualized, our sense of belonging can come from being not them. So as long as I'm not that, then I know kind of what I am over here. And so, yes, politics has become the new religion, and social scientists call this political sectarianism. So if you think of Christianity, there's all different sects within Christianity. You have Baptist, you have Protestant, you have Mormon. And today, pretty much they all get along. But there has been time and, instances in history where there was quite severe fighting. So you might be thinking, okay, I can see the animosity between Democrats and Republicans. That's clear. But what we see is fracturing within the Democratic Party and within the Republican Party. So, let's say you're an environmentalist. There can be purity codes about what the right kind of environmentalist is. And don't you dare speak out about it or have any questions about this. Also happens on the conservative side. You take something like abortion. Don't you dare bring in some nuance and suggest that in some cases that might be the right thing to do, is to allow a woman to have an abortion. And the real danger here is when you don't have counterweights to extremism. So if I'm in that environmentalist movement and you've got these people really enforcing this idea of purity, of what it is to be the right kind, and I can't speak up and put a counterbalance on your extremism, we get more extremism. And I just see it going on both sides, conservatives and Democrats. And the interesting thing is they're actually more similar to each other, those extremes, than the people that are in the middle. And they're just using the same sorts of behaviors, but each is claiming that they have the moral high ground. So when it comes back to communication skills, I mean, it can be scary to speak up against that, but that is what we have to do. And sometimes I'll kick it back to what you do there. Sometimes it starts with the listening, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I probably will take your training. Would you be willing to make a play? I mean, I want to hear what your mission is. So what
Yeah.
is the Moral Courage mission? Because I really want to take your training.
That's good to hear. Yeah.
What do you hope to achieve in the world around this stuff that you're talking about, around the way that we're not coming together in community?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of us, if the conditions are right, we can just communicate freely. Like we can have a conversation if there's trust and respect. But in a culture, in an us against them culture where there is no trust and respect, there is no respect, how to even start a conversation, whether it's at home or at work, that takes a skill set because we all have a nervous system that is scanning for threats 5 times per second. And if we pick up on tone of voice or facial movement and it signals that we're in danger, that maybe our perspective isn't welcome here, we're just going to shut down or we might lash out. So moral courage is really, our focus is on helping people build the skills to step into these difficult conversations. And it's always, always, always in service of a mindset we call confident humility. It's always in service of learning from the person you're talking to. And also it gives you the chance to share your own story. And let me tell you why I'm so concerned about using the skills in service of confident humility. So many communication tools are used to manipulate. They're used to get what you want out of another person. And people can pick up when they're being manipulated.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. There was a new app that came out from a company that kind of teaches these communication skills. And the idea is you kind of type in the scenario that you're working with, and it will spit out some advice on what to do. So I'm testing this. And I typed in something like, maybe I had a boss that was, I perceived him as a little overbearing or her as a little overbearing, and I couldn't have the conversation. My advice was to use, I'm not kidding, passive aggressive tactics. Really? No. This is how easily those skills can be used to manipulate other people. So that's my soapbox there. So, so we have a lot of different offerings to do this. And you mentioned taking our program. We have a mentor certification course. So our mission there is to equip people from all walks of life. So universities, we work with colleges, companies, K-12 schools. They send some of their team members through our program, learn how to teach moral courage, and then they go back into their organization and teach it. So we're really working on that culture change. And the reason why we have people from the organization come in so that they can get trained is because they're more likely to have relationships with people in the workplace, where they can build trust. It's okay, I think, sometimes for an outside consultant to come in initially, but the end goal is to have people in-house that can teach these skills.
I see. So you certify them and then in-house, and then
Exactly.
they teach it in-house.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want to talk about some of your wins in the state of Utah and some of the things that you've been doing there?
I'm really proud of Utah because it's a conservative state for sure, but we also have some of the most progressive LGBTQ laws, and that is something that I think surprises a lot of people. So it's conservative, but it's also very open and inclusive in a lot of ways. And we had the chance just to go into some things that Governor Cox is doing. He's got a Disagree Better initiative that he's working on, and he invited Moral Courage. Well, Utah State University invited us to come up and do an event with him. That was in February, so we were able to bring Moral Courage to Utah there. But we also have several certified mentors here that are doing work throughout organizations. And yeah, it's I'm proud to live here. It's actually a pretty good state. So
we have a really fabulous chapter leader in Salt Lake, by the way, 𝗛𝗃 Rogers. If you're ever turning into this, she's she's an amazing community leader, by the way. I'm happy to make an introduction.
I would love that actually,
Yeah,
because
she's
when
also a former Mormon.
oh yeah, okay, we could chat. I was actually, just so you know, Tracy, I was poking around to see who you had here that I could connect with, and so I did notice that. Please do introduce us.
Yeah, totally. So there's a couple little things that tickled me.
Okay.
Can I talk about my tickles from
Please
some
do.
of the material that I poked around at?
Yeah.
This phrase, truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
I love how you've dissected this. And the question that I would love, everyone that listens live or later or when it goes on the podcast, because this will come out another time, is this. I realized I didn't shut my window. Sorry for the bus going by. Whose truth? Whose truth are we talking about when we use this phrase, truth to power? Whose truth? I love that. And whose power?
Yeah.
And we just had a long conversation last night with a panel on interpersonal power and personal power. And I think that was the takeaway, is that we get so obsessed with the power living out there that we don't actually take responsibility for the power that we do have, which is your whole mission platform. You're saying, hey, you need to actually pick up and talk to the power that you actually have inside of your own skin and use it in a different way.
Yeah.
Would you kind of talk a little bit about, I don't want you to give away the whole training, but talk a little bit about, it's a great dovetail from what we talked about last night about your relationship to personal power and truth to power.
Yeah, I think what I'll do here is give you the popular definition of moral courage and then our definition, and that'll kind of lead me into my thoughts there on your question. So if you Google moral courage, you will get that definition of, it's the act of speaking truth to power. This is, the way that Robert F. Kennedy referred to it back in the 60s. It's also the way that 𝗟𝗀 learned about it. And she actually taught a class at New York University called Moral Courage. And while she was there, she noticed that with her students, anytime they were confronted with a viewpoint that differed from their own, they would become stressed out, defensive, and evenly openly hostile. So they just could not engage. And the really interesting thing was this emotional reaction hijacked their stated values of, dignity, respect, and justice. And they just labeled each other. And this got 𝗟𝗀 thinking, okay, there's something wrong with this definition of moral courage. I mean, because the question does come up, okay, whose truth are we talking about? If you're so bent that you have the truth and then I am, and we're just going to go head to head on this. So she did identify, along with, that's one problem with that popular definition, whose truth. It also doesn't take into account context. So, the power that we have changes with whatever context we're in. There are, and I think we're not very good at noticing when we do have the power in a certain context. So let me take you to our definition of moral courage. It's the act of speaking truth to the power of our own ego. And we're not talking about this in a self-helpy way, but it really goes back to how we're wired. What's that nervous system picking up on? Because our reactions can manipulate us into giving away our power. We can become more defensive than we want to be. We might act in a way that we later regret. So the practice of moral courage is really taking that time to lower our emotional defenses before we decide what to do next. So tell me, did that make sense, or what? I'm losing track of remind me what your question was on the back end there.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sense of how you think about power. And,
yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks
because we're talking, I mean, we're right now. So, okay, I'm going to be the nerdy therapist person and grab hold. And there are things that in my context, I'm obsessed with this concept of splitting. Splitting is a psychological defense. And that in the psychology framework, us versus them thinking or in-group, out-group dynamics is a concept in social psychology. These are defense mechanisms against human connection and interdependence, right? And we, just like the negativity bias lives in the brain, where we're sort of remembering threats more than we're remembering positive things. We're remembering, right, and looking for who doesn't belong with me. I always tell this research study that they were doing testing on in-group and out-group dynamics, and they put coffee drinkers and non-coffee drinkers in a group, okay? And they thought to start to get coffee drinkers to act in a prejudiced way against non-coffee drinkers, that they were going to have to tell them a bunch of negative things about non-coffee drinkers. Because, you know, they're like, it's such an innocuous social psychological experiment. They didn't have to. The minute they put them in the group, they automatically othered, they automatically discriminated, they automatically oppressed. So the minute that we start putting ourselves in these us versus them groups, we oppress, right? And then my last thing I'll say, I'm sorry because I'm geeking out with you and I know you understand every last piece of shit that I'm saying right now, is that we uphold these systems of oppression because they prevent us from grieving loss. Power systems actually protect us from the human fragility that we actually face, that we die, we get sick, bad things happen. So we're going to create these structures to think we have control over stuff. This is from Carol Gilligan's work and Why Patriarchy Persists. Okay, thank you for letting me geek out. I was not trying to rain on your parade at all. I just knew that you were going to get everything that I said, and I was getting excited. I'm like, yes, I want to say this. I'm so excited.
I love it because honestly, I always am thinking about how much information do I give, how much of the neuroscience, how much of the psychology, and your thoughts like, no, not that. Early on when we first met, she said, if you say prefrontal cortex one more time and you're describing the ego, I'm like, but now she's come along. She'll say that now.
Well, now everybody knows the prefrontal cortex. So
I know.
I think it's like saying Band-Aids now. You know, people know what it means.
Yeah.
I think what's really hard is this all sounds like it really not, well, where do I want to go with this? I feel like I want to tell a story because it'll bring people in. How vulnerable do I want to get here?
Go there and I'll match you. So don't worry, I won't leave you out there hanging on your own.
Oh, yeah, I have 3. So let's see. Okay. I'll pick one that's current. So something happened inside Sidewalk Talk this week. So our very first event, we partnered with, see, I'm already feeling anxious about saying this, the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, which is a trans and gay nun order. And it was really offensive to some of our Catholic members, right? And some of them left the organization. And there was I had a conversation with the chapter leader, and I said, you know, I really see their point of view. I see where they're coming from. I said, but in a way, I see these as 2 religious sects. I see this trans nunnery as a religious sect, and I see the Catholic nunnery as a religious sect. And how do we build a bridge? And I also, sometimes I think you can feel so offended by something that someone's doing that it just hurts too much to find a way to build a bridge. Because for somebody that feels like this is my religion and it's sacred to me, and you're making fun of it, I don't know how to come back from that. And I'm just curious, there's some conflicts going on in the world right now that feel almost unbridgeable, right? People are using shame and blame and telling you that you're a morally reprehensible person if you don't do social justice work in a certain way, or you're a white supremacist if you believe these kinds of things, or if you operate this way. How do you even begin to bridge these seemingly unbridgeable things? And I know I'm throwing you quite a hard conversation, but I think you got it.
Well, let me tell you, first of all, what I was thinking about or what I was remembering when you were telling your story. Let's see, this was probably last fall. I attended a conversation, a panel discussion. I was in the audience, and they were talking about book banning. And this was a women's group, and the panelists are up there. And one of the panelists said, because let me back up, in Utah, there were quite a few bills brought forward on banning, several books, and they were looking at, the process of how to ban books. And it got a little extreme. I mean, from both sides, people were just like submitting books to be banned, like from both sides. And it was just madness. But one of these panelists that works for libraries said that he ordered one of these books that was on the book banning list and gave it to the sponsor of the bill. Basically said, I know you hate this book, but here's this book. And everybody in the audience was kind of laughing at that, as if that's the way to show them, as if we'll make you face right here what you think is appalling or disgusting. And I just think, understand really what you're trying to do. Is it to score one for your team, to make them face what they say they don't want to face? And this has to be addressed on an individual level. Like, I could sit here and give advice on what groups could do, but it really is what that wouldn't work. It's really what the individuals do. So if you care about something, the best thing you can do is try to understand where the other side is coming from. They didn't come to their beliefs just out of nowhere. There is a lifetime behind those beliefs.
Yeah.
And the point is not that you agree with it. You don't have to agree with it.
Yeah.
But you just have to try to understand it. So I'll tell a personal story here to kind of illustrate this. So I have a daughter who is gay. She's 19 now. And 2 years ago, I was asked to teach moral courage in Texas. And the woman that invited me out to come teach this workshop, we went to dinner the night before the workshop. And we'd had some conversations before this. So this wasn't just us going in cold and trying to build this relationship. But at dinner, she said to me, I am really having trouble with this whole idea of gay marriage. I'm Baptist. This to me is a sin. It just cannot happen. She didn't know my daughter was gay. Now, so what I did was I said, well, thank you for sharing that with me. I would like to understand more of where you're coming from. And we continued the conversation. And when it was time, I said, I just want you to know, I have a daughter who's gay. Would it be okay if I shared a little bit about her? And then I told her about my Amelia growing up and what I noticed about her. And this is just Amelia, but I mean, boys were never going to be a thing. They were never a thing. I just knew that this is who she was. And after hearing my story, this woman said, she started to rethink her position and said, okay, I'm starting to think maybe I could support gay marriage because of things like healthcare. A lot of times healthcare is tied up. You have to be married to somebody who's working in an organization. As long as you're married, that your partner can get healthcare, if that makes sense. So it's getting access to other resources. And I tell this story because there might have been a time in my life where the second I hear you're not supportive of gay marriage, you're a bigot. I'm sorry, I can't have this conversation with you.
I see.
And then I start labeling, right? Now think about it. What is it that I really want for my daughter? I want her to be accepted. I want her to have the same rights that everyone else has. If the way I go about fighting for that is to say to this person in front of me, you have no place in my life. This conversation's over. What have I just done? I've become a hypocrite. Okay. I want my daughter to be accepted. I can't get that by rejecting other people. So this is the practice of moral courage. It's that hard stuff. It's right. Can you stay in a conversation long enough to just recognize the humanity of the other person, understand their backstory? Now, here's the beautiful thing about change. And I think the people that manipulate and pull the strings on the political level or with social media know this in some way, even if they couldn't say it explicitly. When we tell stories, when I tell my personal story to you and you tell yours to mine, some of my story mixes with your story and you start to see things differently. And 𝗛𝗏𝗿𝗁 says this, look her up. She's a wonderful scholar that does systems work. Your story changes my story. And then my story can change someone else's story. And a change in perception is a change in action. And that change in action is actually slippery. It's not that you can measure it, but you're going to change the way you are in the world. Whether you're at the grocery store, how you're interacting with your child, you're going to take that feeling of connection to other relationships. The solutions aren't going to look like what you think they're going to look like. The solution is not, you need to change. You better get on board with what we're doing here. That is not the solution. That's the war.
Yep. That's not peace building.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's hard when you feel like you've really got the right position. All we're asking people to do is be a little more flexible. Learn what you need to learn about where the other person's coming from.
I don't know if you've had this experience or if you get this kind of backlash. I'm from San Francisco. I just will out myself now. I was much farther left leaning 3 years ago than I am now, for sure. And I read, me and a couple of my other liberal friends actually listen to right-wing podcasts now because we're just interested. We're like, hey, let's just listen and really challenge our listening, right? And I know that's not for everyone. I also have had couples that come in where one person voted for Donald Trump and the other person voted for Joe Biden, and I'm bridging those kinds of conflicts inside my couples therapy room. I mean, couples therapy is all about bridging conflicts. That's all I do all day long. And so I see the potential, right? I know it's possible because I do it for a living. But when you're a bridge builder and you're not willing to polarize, I get shamed for that. I'm told I'm becoming right wing by my crew, and I'm like, no. I just, maybe it's easier for me to not be in the in group because I did have the experience of leaving my religion, so it doesn't frighten me to not belong with you. It doesn't frighten me. I know how to do that, right? So it does feel crappy. I miss certain people, right? And in other ways, I have not been so brave, and I just shrink. I'm like, oh, I'll just keep my mouth shut, you know? Not so much these days. Something's reemerging in me. But what is the question here that I'm asking you? I guess, do you just get flack for holding the center?
Oh, for sure. Oh, for sure.
You're not this enough. You're not that enough.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And you said several times that what's going on reminds you of your religion. And I can totally relate to that. And something that we talk about at Moral Courage is how every idea that's meant to get us closer to whatever the truth is, and the truth usually has to do with caring for each other, seeing each other's humanity. Every good idea can be corrupted because we have these brains that do that. And if you're not aware that you actually are capable of some of the behaviors that you have such disgust for, you'll end up doing the same kinds of things and you won't even know how you got there. There's a really beautiful essay that we discuss in our certification program, the mentor certification program, and it's called The 𝗟𝗏 Ideology by Susan Griffin. And she talks about that. Feminism, fighting for really wonderful things. My grandmother couldn't have a checkbook. My mother couldn't have a credit card. Voting, the right to vote came much further after the rights of men to vote, men of color and white men. What a beautiful movement. But now I see some people in the name of women's rights shaming, humiliating men, labeling cis, white, hetero. I mean, there's so many labels you can put on it. And that is feeding this sense of humiliation that there will be a backlash that we will be reckoning with. And I think we can see that sort of bubbling up. But the inability to go, maybe the way I'm talking about this, maybe the way I'm approaching this work might be feeding something I actually don't want. Does that make sense? It's like, and I love how
you're talking about dehumanizing, I think, and that when we dehumanize people, I mean, the mental health crisis for men in the United States in particular is harrowing. And a big piece of my work when I work with couples is to really talk about, I guess I'm really lucky too, because I work with pretty amazing men in my couples therapy practice who share deeply their loneliness with me. You know, they're earning the money for the family, and they said, look, I love that my wife can go out with the girls. I can't go out with the guys because guys don't talk. We don't, we go to a sporting event, but we're not actually, I'm longing to connect the way I see my wife connect with her girlfriends, you know? And yeah, I'm a big fan of humanizing one another. I am a big fan of hearing stories, though, of people that we don't often intersect with, right? And that's the diversity work that I think is exciting about Sidewalk Talk, is that we try to sit in places where we're going to meet people we normally wouldn't come across in our little, you know, bubbles of neighborhoods. And boy, I definitely have a lot of implicit bias that I've been confronted on just because I've heard so many people's stories. I mean, I don't know people that have 4 children, right? That's a different story, you know?
So tell me about the implicit bias that you've been confronted on, because I hear you talking about hearing stories, and that's how it comes to you.
I'll tell you one of my favorite ones.
Yeah.
It's humble. So this woman who was Asian was wearing an apron, got off the bus, and she had crumbs down the front side of her. And just the way, because she was Asian and the way she was dressed, I assumed that she was getting bottles out of the trash cans, because a lot of folks that present the way that she does, that's what they're doing. And I said, hey, would you like to be listened to? And I was the greeter. She goes, only if you'll listen to me. I said, okay, cool. So I asked the person that was a listener, can you get up? She wants me to listen to her. And I sat down and I had all kinds of stories about what her socioeconomic status was, how good her English was, where she came from, how smart she was, what her This woman has a master's degree. Her daughter has a PhD in chemistry. She's a competitive chess player. And the reason why she had an apron on is she had been baking with some friends, and she was eating a cookie on the bus, and she decided to keep it on so she didn't get cookie crumbs she did get cookie crumbs all over the front of her. And then she shares all these things about her kid, and then she looked at me and she goes, you didn't even imagine any of that was true about me, did you? I said, no. She goes, yeah. And we enjoyed that moment of surprise.
Yep.
And I am grateful to myself to be somebody who has put myself in a position to, your phrase is courageous humility?
Confident humility.
Confident humility. I mean, it takes some confidence and some humility to invite some stranger on the sidewalk to sit down and share their story, right?
Yeah.
And but more importantly, to not assume I know anything about this person. And then to confront myself and go, well, geez, Trace, you're a real dipshit. You were making up all kinds of stories about this person.
Okay, but as a therapist, that's negative talk that's not helpful. I'm going to call you on that.
No, that's me being playful with myself.
Yeah,
my critic is much more sinister. Don't worry.
Okay. So what I love about your story is you had these stereotypes, right, in your mind, and then you sat with the person, and the story was what surprised you. That's how it happens all the time. I think that's the only way to break stereotypes, is to hearing another person's story. And this is something we all do. It's not just something you do, Traci, or something I do. Everybody with a brain thinks like this. So the trick is getting those experiences where you can actually share stories. I think this is a much better way to do it than teaching somebody about implicit bias, because that can backfire. In fact, the research backs this up. So there's a researcher at Harvard and one at Tel Aviv University, and the book is called Getting to Diversity. Oh, I have it right here. This is a great book.
Okay.
They researched over, I think, 800 companies, and the companies that were the best at helping people feel like they belong and included, and were also best at demographic diversity, they did things like have a meeting where you bring your favorite food and we're just going to have a conversation. You're just going to share your life with me. And the brain is really receptive to that. That's how we learn about other cultures. But if you sit me in a room and you give me the stereotype of a culture, that's just another stereotype, right? That I have to try to work with. There are millions of stories within each culture. So this work of understanding and dismantling stereotypes, I don't even like dismantling, but working with stereotypes means you're going to have to expose yourself to as many stories as you can. And what a beautiful thing that you do that at Sidewalk Talk. That's what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No,
I
for
love
sure.
the work that you're doing there.
And I'll just give a plug for 𝗛𝗏𝗄. She's going to be coming on Monday, and that's what she does. She teaches people how to tell stories. Because I also don't even think we speak in stories anymore.
No.
See, I mean, I'm listening to you, but I have a side hustle. One day, see, you have a side hustle that we need to like plug because I know about you. I
What's
sleuthed
that?
you out. Are
Oh
you a
no.
little bit of are you a little bit of a rock star?
Oh, you mean play drums? Is that what you
Yeah.
mean? Oh, yes,
Yeah.
I do. Yes. Yes, and I play in a band, but look, it's
What
a
is this
student band
cagey response? Like,
because I really have a hard time talking about myself. I don't like it. I'd rather talk about anybody else in the room. So yes, I play drums.
so what kind of shoes do you wear when you play drums? Do you wear high heels or Converse or barefoot or what's the deal with drums?
Usually some leather boots with some cool silver stud work or something like that. So
Okay.
yeah, that's my thing. I don't wear heels anymore. Wish I could, but I can't.
We're getting old. Yeah. We're kind of coming on time, and this has been so fun. And you have to pass along my thanks to 𝗟𝗏𝗏𝗰𝗁 because I think I got through these last few months. I share a lot of her posts because I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
please, people, listen to this woman. And any way that I can support y'all, I'm here for it. But we do this fun ritual. We have this ritual, which is that I hand over the mic to you to speak to listeners who've listened on the sidewalk all over the world in many cases. Whatever is in your heart, words of wisdom or a wish.
To say to them, well, it's definitely not going to be advice because that's all, my advice wouldn't be useful for you. But I think maybe I'll do this. I'll tell the story of when I first felt really listened to.
Ooh.
So there was a period where I was not. I have to be careful because I can be too hard on myself. There was a period of time where I really struggled with parenting. It was hard. And I thought many days I would rather be at work. This is hard. It felt thankless and it felt like there wasn't a lot of respect. And sometimes I would get angry with my kids, more angry than I wanted to. It's that nervous system, hijack. And I got to the point where my family was just telling me, this has to change. This has to change. This is not good for my marriage and for my kids. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go talk to somebody. And I was super depressed and anxious at that time. And I set up an appointment with a therapist, and I was sure I was going to be put on medication. I still remember it was November. I remember exactly where I was. And she just listened to me. And she had this look on her face like, girl, you are not broken. You are okay. And it was the best experience because I felt like I did have some power to change. That the reason why I was angry and upset and depressed had its roots in some experiences. I didn't just get there because I'm a bad person. And the listening was what allowed me to transform my life. And it was the hardest work I've ever done, but it began with the listening. And so that's the gift you bring to the world.
Are y'all hearing that? Do you know how many moms pull up in their strollers and sit down? We've had one sit down and just cry. Can I just sit? She actually said, can I just sit here and use your chair and eat my sandwich? I'm like, oh, girl, you sit here. If that baby cries, I'll pick it up. Yeah, I feel you. What a beautiful story. Thank you for your vulnerability and your share. It's very sweet.
Thank you for the question.
I will add something to your story, which is it's the number one thing that we have people tell us when they sit down in the chair. People go, what is the number one thing? People tell me about their therapists. It is the thing I hear the most.
And
And
Tracy,
they tell me that they love their therapist. I said, do you tell your therapist that?
no, but Tracy, here's the question that brings up. There are people who can't have a therapist. They can't afford it. There's no health care. How can we be just better friends?
Mm-hmm.
I think we'd need less therapists if we were just better friends. And that's what really got me interested in your work, was your story of understanding that. And that's why you took this practice of listening out to the sidewalk. And I just think that's a beautiful gift that you're giving to the world. And who knows, one day maybe I'll show up. You need to hook me up with Danica, and maybe I'll go out and help y'all do this one day.
Good. She's amazing. You're gonna want to hire her.
Okay, maybe I'll
Okay,
throw her away.
no, yeah, no, there's no stealing. We're a community run project. Everything is democratic here, and yeah, we just want to support people in creating their own initiative that fits their community.
Yeah.
And they do all kinds of other things. Everyone here, and diverse, and I love the crew in Brazil sets up their listening in circles rather than in rows, so that you sit in a circle and talk in community rather than one-to-one, which is kind of, and I love that. I love it.
Like that.
This was wonderful. Thank you for making the time to be here, and for your work in the world, being peace builders and teaching us how to have moral courage and courageous humility. Confident humility. Oh,
So
get it.
trust in your life experiences, but always be open to learning. That's the takeaway. Yeah.
Wonderful. All right, everyone, thanks for tuning in. And for those that are watching recorded, thanks for watching recorded. You're still part of the crew. And this will go up on the podcast too eventually. So thank you so much.